Bardstown, Kentucky. Her car was found, but Crystal wasn't. For one family, that absence became the beginning of a search that never truly ended. It was the kind of silence that settles over an ordinary place and changes how people remember it. In this case, the timeline itself became the first and most important clue. Crystal Rogers disappeared on July 3, 2015. 2 days later, on July 5th, her maroon Chevrolet Impala was found abandoned on the Bluegrass Parkway. Inside the car, investigators found her keys, her purse, and her cell phone. The vehicle was there. The personal items were there. Crystal was not. That is the central contradiction of the case. The car created a trail, but it did not explain what happened to the woman who had been driving it. It did not account for the hours between the last confirmed sighting and the discovery along the highway. It did not answer the simplest questions in the case, the one that has never stopped echoing through it. If Crystal's belongings were left behind, where did Crystal go? Crystal Rogers was 35 years old and the mother of 5. She lived in Bardstown, Kentucky, a small city that would become inseparable from her disappearance. Bardstown is not just the place where this case happened. It is where the questions began, where the search unfolded, and where the investigation gradually widened from one missing person report into a case that would span years. Nelson County, where Crystal was last seen alive, became the geographic center of the earliest investigation, and every later development remained tied back to those first known movements. In cases like this, broader numbers can be difficult to hold on to. In 2014, there were an estimated 90,000 people missing in the United States at any given time. About 60% were adults and 40% were children. Those statistics matter because they show how common missing person cases can be and how easily one case can blur into another. But Crystal Rogers' case never stayed abstract. It was built from specific dates, specific places, and specific objects found inside a specific car on a specific highway. Her mother, Sherry Ballard, reported Crystal missing and became one of the most visible voices demanding answers. Her father, Tommy Ballard, also searched for his daughter. That search ended in another tragedy in 2016 when Tommy Ballard was shot and killed while hunting on his property. His death remains unsolved. For the family, the case did not simply pause. It deepened. The earliest public timeline places Crystal's last known sighting on July 3, 2015. She was last seen alive with her boyfriend, Brooks Houck, at his family's farm in Nelson County, Kentucky. That detail would become one of the most closely examined parts of the case because it anchored the final confirmed sighting to a specific place and a specific person. Brooks Houck later claimed that Crystal was playing games on her phone when he went to bed and that she was gone the next morning. That was his account. It was not the same thing as a confirmed explanation for her disappearance. What happened in the hours after that remains the central gap. By July 5, 2015, Crystal's maroon Chevrolet Impala had been found abandoned on the Bluegrass Parkway. The car had a flat tire. Her keys, purse, and cell phone were still inside. Those facts are fixed in the record, and they matter because they shape the early response. The car suggested movement, but also abrupt interruption. It suggested that something had gone wrong, but not what and not when. Then, just days after Crystal was last seen alive, investigators spoke with Brooks Houck. On July 8, 2015, he was interviewed by the Nelson County Sheriff's Office. During that interview, according to the allegation provided in the case record, His brother, Nick Houck, a Bardstown police officer, called and advised him not to speak with investigators. That detail would later become one of the most significant early complications in the case, not because it answered what happened to Crystal, but because it raised a new question about the integrity of the investigation itself. Why would a missing woman's case suddenly involve a police officer contacting his brother during an interview? And what effect could that have had on the search for the truth in those first critical days? On October 16, 2015, the department took action. Nick Houck was fired from the Bardstown Police Department for interfering with the investigation into Rogers' disappearance. That decision marked a turning point. It confirmed that the case was no longer simply about locating a missing mother. It had begun to expose conflicts, fractures, and conduct that investigators considered serious enough to remove a police officer from the department. Years passed. The case remained unresolved in one crucial respect. Crystal Rogers was still not found. But the legal story kept moving. Brooks Houck, Joseph Lawson, and Steve Lawson were later convicted in connection with Crystal Rogers' murder, and appeals are ongoing. Even with those convictions, one fact has never changed. Crystal Rogers' body has not been recovered. That is what makes this case so unsettling. The car was found. The belongings were found. The timeline became clearer. But the woman at the center of it all never came home. And once the early days of the investigation began to point toward interference, unanswered questions only multiplied. The abandoned Impala became more than a stranded vehicle. It became the object around which the entire investigation had to organize itself. Investigators knew the car was found on the Bluegrass Parkway on July 5, 2015, with a flat tire and Crystal Rogers' keys, purse, and cell phone inside. Those are the confirmed details. What they do not explain is why those personal items were left behind, or what happened in the hours surrounding the discovery. That gap matters because the car could place investigators in a location, but it could not tell them who had been with Crystal, where she went, or whether she ever left that area alive. As the case developed, the search widened beyond the highway shoulder and into nearby communities. One of those places was Woodlawn Springs subdivision, which the FBI searched in connection with the case. That search is part of the record, but the outcome of that search is not provided here, and it should not be turned into a conclusion. In a disappearance like this, a search can matter as much for what it does not produce as for what it does. The public may see movement, officers, evidence teams, and vehicles going in and out of a neighborhood. But the central question remains unchanged. Did the search bring Crystal any closer to being found? Or did it only add another location to a long list of places checked and checked again? One allegation in the case added another layer of uncertainty. According to the provided claim, Anna Whitesides, the Houck brothers' grandmother, refused to testify before a grand jury regarding her white Buick, which was suspected to be involved in the case. That claim must be handled carefully. It is not presented here as a proven explanation for Crystal's disappearance. And the Buick is described only as suspected to be involved. Even so, the allegation matters because it shows how the investigation moved from a missing car to questions about another vehicle, another possible link, and another unanswered thread. But suspicion is not proof, and a suspected vehicle is not the same thing as evidence that explains what happened to Crystal Rogers. That distinction is important because this case has always been built on a tension between what was found and what was not. A car was found, belongings were found, a subdivision was searched, a grand jury issue was raised, yet Crystal herself remained missing. And without her body, the case carried a wound that no procedural step could fully close. Evidence can support a theory. Court proceedings can test allegations. But the most essential physical fact still had not changed. Crystal Rogers had disappeared, and the public record still did not show where she was. Then the case entered a much later phase. For years, the investigation moved forward without the kind of public legal breakthrough that would settle the question. In 2023, the first major charges arrived. Joseph Lawson was indicted on charges connected to the case. Brooks Houck was arraigned on a murder charge in connection with Crystal's disappearance. Steve Lawson was also arrested and indicted on charges connected to the case. These were legal accusations at that stage, not convictions. An indictment is not a verdict. An arraignment is not a finding of guilt. And a charge is not the same thing as the full story. That is why the legal turn in this case had to be watched with precision. The courtroom phase was not just a dramatic development. It was a formal process, one that required allegations to be presented, challenged, and decided under the rules of law. In 2025, that process produced convictions. Brooks Houck was convicted of Crystal Rogers' murder and sentenced to life in prison. Joseph Lawson and Steve Lawson were convicted in connection with Crystal Rogers' murder. These are the confirmed legal outcomes in the provided record. They changed the formal legal standing of the case. They also marked a point that Crystal's family and the public had waited years to reach. Still, even after those convictions, the case did not become simple. Appeals are ongoing. That matters because the legal system has not finished its work, and the public record remains active. The convictions changed the status of the defendants, but they did not recover Crystal Rogers. They did not answer every question attached to the disappearance, and they did not erase the long delay between the moment she vanished and the moment prosecutors finally brought the case into its courtroom phase. Why did it take so long for the legal system to reach this point? What evidence had to be assembled, tested, challenged, and reassembled before the charges could stand? The defense claims, as reflected in the research available here, are not detailed in full. What is clear is that the case remains subject to appellate review, which means the convictions are not necessarily the final procedural word. In serious cases like this, the law can move forward while the family's central question remains untouched. A sentence can be imposed. A verdict can be returned. But if the body has not been recovered, the emotional and factual center of the case stays open. That is the missing middle of this story. Between the last confirmed sighting and the abandoned car, there is a stretch of time that the public record still does not fully explain. Between the early investigation and the later convictions, there were years of searching, waiting, and unresolved grief. Between the evidence that was found and the person who was not, there remains an absence that no legal document can completely fill. For Crystal's family, the question was never only whether someone would be held accountable. It was also where Crystal is and whether she can ever be brought home. So the story ends where it is always strange to begin again, with Bardstown, with the abandoned Impala, and with the unanswered fact at the center of everything. Crystal Rogers disappeared on July 3, 2015, and her body has never been found. The courts have moved. Legal consequences have been issued. Appeals are ongoing. But the most important question still hangs over the case, heavier than the rest. What happened in the gap between the last confirmed sighting and the discovery of her car? And where is Crystal Rogers now? Follow Whispered Cases for a new case every week. Subscribe so you never miss one.